Hi, and thank you for joining us for this webinar with Hannah Nardini, Workplace Strategist and Managing Director of WK Space. I'm your host, Leslie Thompson, Director of Workplace Segment Strategy in North America. Today's webinar and live Q&A is part of our exciting and inspiring Ignite event series in support of NeoCon. We're putting on a wide range of live and digital events to connect, converse, and help feed your creativity this fall. There's a link to the full program in the chat box. Today, we're happy to have Hannah Nardini with us, who is a leading workplace strategist with 25 years of experience in the design of office interiors and workplace. She takes a holistic approach to workplace solutions and helps her clients increase productivity, happiness levels, reduce real estate portfolios and attrition rates, and attract the new, yet elusive, generation of workers. To stay abreast of shifting employee and employer attitudes, needs, and wants over the past 18 months, Hannah and her team have been running an ambitious global research program. To date, WK Space has captured data from over 876,000 respondents across the world. Today, Hannah is going to share the latest insights, literally hot off the presses, about what employees and employers are looking for from the workplace going forward. How do they differ? What motivates the return to the office? And what does that mean in practical terms for office design? After the presentation, Hannah joins us for a live Q&A, so please send us your questions by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. And Hannah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. As explained, there are three core components to our business. That is strategy, design, and change management, but with a very independent appraisal. And simply put, we're here to build short and long-term strategies that are practical, sustainable, and are designed to support the people in an environment that they can thrive in. So we started running these weekly surveys back in May 2020. The world of work had changed beyond recognition, and we were interested to explore how we needed to adapt our own business and the advice that we were given to better support clients in this next step of the complete unknown. And we actually continued to run these surveys. So as mentioned, there's over 876,000 responses that sit at a complete global level. And today's insights into some changes that have occurred since July 2021. There's been a little bit of a curveball, so significant, in fact, that we've tested this quite extensively in the past 2 weeks. So we gathered a further 20,000 responses purely targeted to the US employee base and business owners and leaders. So we're just going to share with you some of the insights from that. So let's talk about everything up until July 21. We've learned a lot. Employers and employees had surprised themselves at how successful the transition to remote working had actually gone, to the point where even the most hardened managers who previously just didn't support remote working were forced to admit that they were surprisingly productive and had actually enjoyed some of the benefits. In fact, some of the positives noted: not having to do that rush hour commute, saving time, saving money, quality time with the family, better work-life balance, improved productivity. But by October 2020, we had started to detect an undercurrent of issues. So whilst remote working was working, there were clearly some challenges emerging within organisations that we knew, if left unchecked, would create much bigger problems in future. So let's have a look at what some of those were. So whilst we loved not having to do that rush hour commute, we simply just added that time to our workday. We then realised that we could get through far more calls without that travel between the meetings. We now spend our lives living in front of a screen. The extended workday filled with meetings means our doing time has been pushed to out of hours. So now our work-life balance has become somewhat compromised. We've started to note that bleeding together of our work and our personal life. We then started to see panic set in because the thought of now trying to squeeze that daily commute back into your already busy schedule was making people doubt how productive they would actually be in reality. We also found, though, that emails suddenly became a form of instant communication for some. There were frustrations as to why people weren't responding quick enough. I know they're sat in front of their computer, so why aren't they responding to me? And this has actually put some relationships within teams under tension. But another big area to consider is the lack of professional development, particularly in your younger generations, and what they're missing. We underestimated the value of just how being around and in the presence of experienced people and learning from them, what it meant. So are we actually heading for a bit of a skills gap in the workforce within the next few years? Will you have the capability to promote from within? And finally, we also learned that existing client relationships that switched virtual strengthened in many cases. But the challenge was with new client relationships. We've seen that they've just simply not been built with the same level of bond that we would have expected to have seen. In fact, clients will describe it as lacking a sense of loyalty. So as you can see, these are not insignificant challenges, and what started out so well has slightly gone out of kilter. Now, in its current guise, a fully virtual workforce without any control is simply unsustainable. But when we look at where we were in October 2020, we started to see patterns emerging. People had settled into a rhythm. And across all areas, when we kept remeasuring week on week, we noted that things were slowly starting to creep up. And these are more specifically focused on negative impacts. In fact, the biggest impact has been around the feelings of integration. It's people feeling that they're not part of a team, followed by the impacts of mental well-being and the tolls of social isolation. Now, if we've seen these levels increase by this extent over the past 11 months, where are we going to be in another 12 months if these are continued to be left unchecked? There comes a point when the detriments start to outweigh the positives. But let's start to consider more specifically some impact groups. So caring responsibilities. Those with responsibilities like that feel that their career progression has worsened by 36%. That's 12% above these averages. There's a feeling that they're disadvantaged. They've had to be juggling more than just their workload. There's a feeling, rightly or wrongly, that they've been less committed to their role. Whereas those who have disabilities have actually reported positive impact. They felt there's been a levelling out. They felt more included and part of a team than before. They feel that their contribution was more valued. In fact, they score their career progression as actually improving by 17%. It levelled the playing field in so many respects. But it would be really unfortunate for us to not learn valuable lessons from this and ensure that inclusion is at the heart of any of our future of work programmes. So all in all, how much change, how much has the pandemic really opened people's eyes to change? On average, 83% have reported it significantly changed their outlook. For those with disabilities, 89%. It certainly did appear to be the catalyst for change. So when we ask people about their preferences when it comes to working remotely, we typically see this as a working pattern. There are some people who simply prefer being in an office. They just want to return. And there are equally those who like the flexibility. They would like to continue working remote. In fact, again, just to note, those with disabilities report 45% would prefer to stay working in a fully remote way. But more often than not, what we started to see is people just simply want balance. It's a healthy mix between office and remote working. Now, the office is certainly not disappearing anytime soon. But it means that if we take all of these preferences into account and allow individuals to choose, the occupation in the office could be about 31% each day. This represents a significant opportunity for an employer regarding how they rationalise space, considering lowering costs. There's no need to be planning for a fully occupied office. So as we reached towards July, we noticed that plans were starting to get firmed up with a lot of businesses. And we wanted to understand how people were feeling about the prospect of returning to the office. Reassuringly, 65% are ready to go back. And there are some who acknowledge, I have concerns and anxieties about this, and we would expect to see that. But 35% are simply just not ready yet. But we're interested to know whether people had actually been asked to return to their offices yet. And as you can see, we were quite surprised by the results. 80% of employers have asked people to come back into the office. Now, this has been a highly controversial area amongst our own clients. It's very tricky to get the balance between business as usual, the midst of a pandemic, and individual preferences. But okay, here we are. We're starting to see signs of in the data of people returning back to the office. So we wanted to know from people the reasons why you're going to return. Now, if I look back at the top 5 that came out not only towards the end of last year, but also all the way through the first half of this year, to work collaboratively with my colleagues, to socialise, for a change of scenery and routine, to attend meetings and to improve my well-being. It's identical to the list that we see here today. But in addition to this, there were some other areas. We started to see 28% of people report that they need to go back into the office, unfortunately, to use paper and filing. 24% to be mentored and 26% to make sure they're mentoring others. So it's reassuring to see those coming through. Understanding these motivations is really important. It starts to help us consider how the workplace needs to change to support some of these reasons. So we then started to ask a little bit further, well, what else is important to you? And there was a long list of items, and these are now the top 4 responses. Location. People are keen to have city or town-based office locations with lots of local amenities. They want to make sure they're working alongside their team, particularly if they're making the effort to come in. Don't forget, people felt a decline in the sense of feeling of team. So it makes sense that this would appear in the top 4. Greater emphasis on sustainability. People have been given a renewed sense of responsibility in this regard. So this is a great foundation for change. And on-site catering. So don't forget, socialising is also one of those key motivators for people to come back. We are noticing a trend from our clients towards restaurants, cafes, even baristas being built into the office as a draw to pull people back together. So how about employers? What's important to them? Well, location and sustainability also appeared in the list, so that's great alignment to see. But we also now start to see rationalisation of space becoming important for 68% of employers and reducing costs for 82%. It's certainly been noted amongst our own clients. There's a greater review of corporate real estate and much more long-term focus on cost planning. So the signs were looking good. People wanted change. Employers wanted to use this as an opportunity to work smarter, save money. People wanted flexibility, but nevertheless, still come back to a physical place. We were set to be heading for a healthy workplace that was built around balance, and something that we've been banging the drum about for many years. But we asked in our webinar back in September 2020, how much will really change? We said, old habits die hard. Is the pandemic enough to change a 300-year-old work culture? And I will be honest, we had our doubts. We had seen signs of transformation, but we had also started to spot signs of old habits creeping back in too. So let's see how this has played out a year on. Let's go back to these top 6 reasons I just shared with you about why people will come back. We mentioned that this list is not too dissimilar to the one that we saw earlier this year and towards the end of last year. But since July 2021, there is a new reason why people have said they will come back to the office that exceeds all of the ones mentioned here and previously. Taking first place is the good old-fashioned return to presenteeism. My employer will expect it. So, okay, we could argue the employer will certainly have their reasons on why they feel this way. And we need to note these reasons and think about that, but it is not necessarily supported by employees. So let's look back again at the employee view on remote working. This is what they said that they wanted. I'm just going to show you how this starts to differ when we take into account the view of an employer. So notice 4 days in the office, 4%, 5 days in the office, 7%, with an average occupation of 31%. Suddenly, 4 days in the office, 22%, 5 days in the office, 32%. That gives us an average daily occupation of 69%. Okay, so we're definitely starting to see a bounce back here. Without a doubt, though, there are some elements of remote working that are continuing. But this is the short term. What does an employer plan on doing in the long term? So let's take this picture where we left off, 69%. We've got 22% in the office for 4 days a week, 32% in the office for 5 days a week. All of a sudden, 63% of employers see the long-term aim to get people back in the office for 5 days a week. And what does this mean for levels of occupation? We've gone straight back to pre-COVID levels of around 80%. So sure enough, around 81%. So the question now is, well, who decides? Who decides on what the most appropriate working pattern will be for the workforce? How important is this to your employees? Well, as you can see, employees believe it should be done through mutual agreement. 42% say that. Those with disabilities, 48% of them believe it should be down to the employee who has the say. And it's 32% for those with caring responsibilities. So what appears to be happening is employers are deciding this on behalf of their employees, but only 25% of employees agree with that approach. This is a warning sign, but we do need first to stop and think about why employers are reacting in this way. What do they see that maybe others don't? So we ask them the same question. Why would you want your employees to return to the office? And as you can see, they do see things differently and from a much wider lens. They do believe that quality of service, quality of work, communication has declined. They're concerned about the impact on culture, morale, and skills. They want to make sure that new starters have the right experience. Now, these are all fair reasons, but are they strong enough reasons to enforce a wholesale return to the office for 4 or 5 days a week? And many would argue that this comes down, in many instances, to poor management styles, a lack of protocols, and an imbalanced approach. But there are also some alarming other reasons, not as high as these proportions, but nevertheless disappointing to see appear. Now, we commend the honesty in the survey and the admission of these areas. And in the interests of validating this data, I surveyed the same questions to different people 4 times. We got the same response. After all of the positive experiences we've learned, ultimately, the trust barrier does not appear to have been broken for some. The need to see people to know that their working is alive and well. But combine this with the management of egos makes for a very compelling justification for some leaders. But what about all these positive experiences? What about the preferences of employees? Are businesses now about to set out on a collision course? Well, what started off so well last year, with only 9% reporting to want to return back to the old ways of working, we've seen this rapidly increase to a shocking 56% of employers note they just want things to go back to how they were. In fact, only 19% reported wanting to revolutionize the way that they're working. Certainly a missed opportunity. To help this along its way, we saw a lot of high-profile companies publicly call out remote working as an aberration. Some mandated the full-time return to the office and in time have quickly reversed or stalled on some of these decisions. So how might this play out? Well, how strong is presenteeism? And does an employee think that they need to be physically seen to get a promotion opportunity? We were hoping the pandemic would have broken that. But sadly, 66% of employees now think that they need to be physically visible in an office and to their managers to have any hope of career progression. For those with caring responsibilities, this jumps up to 78%, and for those with disabilities, 79%. Now, maybe this is a misconception. Does the employer see past visibility and look at performance amongst many other things? Sadly not. 79% of employers mention that it will impact on their decisions when it comes to promotion. So where does this leave us? Well, I wanted to understand where the power balance sits. Do employers really think that they hold all the cards? 71% think they do. In fact, only 20% of employers believed that employees held the power. In fact, to quote one, people need to be grateful they still have a job to go to. They will do as they are told. But is this really the case? Are employees likely just to go along with employer demands? 69% report that they will consider changing jobs. 58% report that they've already started looking. Those with caring responsibilities, this jumps up to 78%, and those with disabilities, 88%. Could this be a massive step backwards in equality, diversity, and inclusion? All of those strides that we've taken forward in recent years. But there is a danger. Employers seem to have lost touch with their people, or maybe they're just not reading the signs correctly. Now, at a time when reflection needs to be happening, it needs consultation, it needs informed decision-making, very few have actually embarked upon this. The desire to return to the old ways is clearly driving some straight towards the next steps. But you could ask, why are you asking questions if you're not prepared to listen? Now, thankfully, the experience we have of working with 168 clients over the past 18 months has shown us that there are some who are taking stock. They're learning, adjusting, and transforming. But remembering that leaders do have a different perspective, as do new starters, as do clients and managers. We need to look at the organisation in a holistic way. And we've learned that you can find the common ground, you can bring people along on that journey. By asking the questions, listening to the responses, responding in a measured and a balanced way, is seeing success, and it's seeing a happy and engaged workforce. Now, the next steps are unknown, but there is an opportunity for you to define what you want that future to be and go out and make that happen. So I just want to share with you finally just some key trends from our work with companies who are embracing this in the right way. It is about cost and space rationalisation. For the first time, we're seeing whole real estate portfolios being looked at. This has affected the world, and the opportunity is there for every region. Asking questions about whether the space is right for you. Is it in the right location? Where are you going to attract the best of the talent? Is it showcasing the best of you? Is it sustainable? All of these are considerations now. And ultimately, the real estate teams need to be looking at flexibility. How do we plan for the unknown? Now, it is possible to achieve all of this through much smarter planning and strategy. We are seeing structured frameworks. Allowing employees to just choose what they want to do is not necessarily the right approach either. But meeting the needs of the individual, the team, the manager, the business, your clients, is likely to see frameworks that are centered around 40 to 60% office attendance. Now, surprisingly, people fully support this, providing it's done with validation and consultation. How it is handled and managed and communicated is vital. But for those who struggle with communication, trust, or managing a virtual team, we've been working on curriculums of coaching that are designed to give dedicated support. It would be unfortunate for just a few managers needing that additional support to derail a transformation project. Sustainability is on the agenda. So we're seeing reduction in paper, some going completely paperless, or at least 70% reduction. We're seeing at least 50% of printers being removed. We're seeing behavioural contracts come into play, outlining a code of conduct that's expected from all, particularly during a pandemic. We see things like clear desk policies driving behaviours around smarter working, but also the establishment of best practice protocols on hybrid meetings. We are seeing workplace change. We're looking at reusing and repurposing segments of the office to truly test ideas out. We actually see 74% of people support desk sharing, but we do need to rebalance the workplace. We need to think about more collaboration where teams can work together, more meeting spaces that support virtual meetings, but also the importance of social spaces. So thinking deli bars, baristas, even down to wellness, Peloton bikes, yoga studios, reflection and meditation rooms, parents' rooms, counselling spaces. Added to this, though, is digital integration. It's the emergence of room and desk booking systems. We're seeing standardized setups. We're seeing IoT sensors to continually monitor and capture data. So don't be afraid to ask the questions. People are far more reasonable and realistic than some leaders may believe. But do not be disingenuous. If you are asking, you need to listen to the response and give it consideration that it deserves before making decisions. This is a phenomenal opportunity to define the next generation of work and workplace. And the most successful companies embracing change are those who are bringing their people along on that journey. So thank you for listening. Hopefully this has been thought-provoking, and please do get in touch if you want to understand more about how we can help your business further.
Great. Hannah, thank you so much. I have listened to the presentation throughout Ignite, and I pick up something new every time. So are you ready for live Q&A? Awesome. Hopefully our audience has some questions, but if not, I have one to get us started. Why do you think that trust levels between employers and employees decreased? Because shouldn't success stories from working at home, as we've all experienced through the pandemic, shouldn't that promote more trust, not less?
Yeah, it should, basically, but it didn't. It didn't quite work out that way for some. Not everybody, but for some it didn't. And it's partially driven by the desire for things just to go back to how they were. People, as you noted from the data, want it to return to some extent. But there's also concern for some employers that they feel employees are dictating too much. But on the flip side, we also need to bear in mind that employers can see the picture in a completely different way. They do have a different lens to this, and they see it in a wider scale. So some might have complete justification. They might have really strong reasons, and for example, as we shared in the data there, for reasons of things like quality, culture, and service, they're not insignificant. So for lots of reasons, we might find ourselves here. But the most important thing is to engage with people, to really just listen to what they're saying, and give a much more reasoned response rather than a reactive one.
That's the hardest part of any conversation, right? Is the listening part and what you take away from it. How about this? This is a good one. Do you feel that simply returning to the office would be enough to improve workers' well-being? What else do you feel businesses could do to help support that?
Okay, to return to the office and well-being, it never was part of well-being, and it never will be. So well-being whilst working remote has also been negatively compromised too. We need to remember it's not just office linked, it's actually any work environment. So a fully virtual workforce is unlikely to be the answer, and full-time in the office isn't the answer either. So as everything has been suggested in that presentation, it needs balance on both sides of it. That's the most effective. So employers need to find and provide the right tools. They need practices in place that are healthy. They need an environment. So for example, employee assistance programs, they need to give people the best of the natural daylight, perhaps more dedicated wellness spaces, healthy work-life balance practices, but also looking at management techniques as well. But there comes a point though where employees need to take responsibility too, and they need to make good use of those tools. So they need to practice more mindfulness, make smarter decisions. They need to put in professional and personal boundaries. So well-being is one of those things that needs to have a collective effort. It's not just driven by one side or the other, and it's not driven by just one environment or the other either. Collective.
Good point. Taking responsibility for our own balance is really important. I can honestly say I abuse that all the time because something comes up and it's so important, it has to be done, and then all of a sudden I've worked 14 hours instead of, the normal, whatever normal is anyway. So here's a good one as well. What are the changes that employees would like to see in the workplace since the pandemic? You covered a few of them in the talk. If you could revisit those.
Yeah, so we're hearing a lot. There's a bit of a new buzzword going around called destination workplaces. So I'm sure you've probably all heard that before. What we do know for sure, though, is people don't want to return to an office that's just a sea of desks. Equally, they don't want to be coming back to seas of cubicles either. And their reasons for attending the office have changed. We know that, and the workplace needs to catch up to reflect that. So it's more about cafe spaces. We're seeing social and well-being environments, a little bit more of a home from home type configuration. Spaces where you can relax and rejuvenate, spaces that you can be productive. But for some, it's simple. It might mean I want to come into a space that I could get a really good cup of coffee. I want decent Wi-Fi and a space where I can just have a private virtual meeting, but that isn't my home. And we need to break that traditional concept of what an office should look like and perhaps focus more on what it needs to deliver rather than just the aesthetic. So this might mean a lot less in open plan environments and perhaps an increase in more private spaces, an increase in more social and wellness spaces. But there is no one size fits all approach. There's an absolute need to identify what you do as a business and identify what spaces and environments do our people need to be most effective in that environment.
That's going to lead to a big cultural shift in so many ways, especially in real estate strategy and design. And it's kind of exciting. I mean, if you think about it, that might lure me into the office if I could have a meeting without interruption.
I know, it's an incredible opportunity, and I can't wait 5 years from now to look back and see what did we take up from this. It's a fascinating time to be involved in this job.
It's going to be interesting to see. And one last question: what is it about visibility that makes employees and employers think that people have to be present in the office space itself to be able to progress their careers?
Yeah. So we need to be honest with ourselves here. This is not anything new. This is decades of career progression practices. And it's, the pandemic hasn't been strong enough to break that. We've been too ingrained in this for decades. But often we note that with poor measures of performance, it's sometimes hard to see a person's hard work or maybe the extra effort that they're going to. And we can sometimes find that adage of out of sight, out of mind comes into play. And studies over the past few years have physically shown that whilst working from home has increased a person's productivity, they're not rewarded with promotions at anywhere near the same rate as their office colleagues who are much more visible. In fact, it's less than half. So the view is, if you're not in the office, you're not developing maybe some of the same kind of relationships and managerial skills that you need. And I think there is maybe some truth in the relationship part of that. Being with somebody in person, without a doubt, does build stronger bonds. But we also have a sort of unconscious bias that's coming into play. You might see somebody and you might note all of the struggles that they've gone through to get to an end result. Unlike those who are remote, you didn't see that. And so you don't see that they've necessarily put the same effort in. So you can understand how it happens. But it's going to take work to break down what is ultimately a two-class system from those who are visible and those who aren't. And it needs to be consciously worked out. Managers need to be trained. And we're seeing a lot of our clients now putting in place training programs on proximity bias, which is a phrase that I think everybody's using now. And so the more that happens, eventually, in years to come, we will start to see it work its way out. But I absolutely don't see this as an immediate fix. And I don't think the pandemic has changed that in any way.
I agree. And it's going to be really interesting to look at all of these results that you've come up with. I'm still in awe of 876,000 respondents to the surveys to compare it, what did we really learn and what did we take away and move forward with? So thank you. Are there any other questions from our audience? I'm not seeing any in the chat or in the Q&A. So give you guys a minute in case you have another question for Hannah. And if not, we'll let you enjoy the rest of your day. 30 more seconds. And I'm not seeing anybody, but Hannah, thank you so much for sharing all of your research with us. We so appreciate it. And this is the final Ignite webinar. So ending with a bang. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.